Welcome into PEC Match Point. It's your premier destination for around the Power Esports Conference. We've got a big show today. You want to make sure you stick around. We've got highlights, reactions to some of the biggest matchups of the spring season so far as we go around the league to bring you the best from the premier FPS Esports League in the country. Of course, PEC Match Point brought to you by the Idaho Air National Guard. As I said, great show here today. We're going to go around the PEC, take you all the highlights from week 2 that you need to see. Big games in Rocket League, Overwatch, Valorant. You're not going to want to miss out. And Carson Cass is going to join us, break down some of those and what they mean going forward in the spring. We're going to go inside the PEC with Baylor Director of Esports and Head Coach Adam Stanley. Year 0 for the Bears, the Rocket League program looking insanely sharp. Cannot wait to talk to him. And we'll wrap things up as we preview Week 3. Speaking of Baylor, they've got a massive game coming up with Boise State. We'll talk about that. But first, let's go back to what happened in Week 2, and we start with Syracuse taking on Ohio State. The Orange, fresh off their win over Michigan State last week, continued their hot start to the spring. A 3-0 win over Ohio State, sweeping the Buckeyes. 2-1, 5-4, 4-1 were your finals. Tiz RL and Lesser both dropping 5 goals on 15 shots. The Orange offense was coming out to play for the Buckeyes. Bungo put 4 goals in the back of the net. He had 4 saves as well, but the Orange offense and their aggression, 33 demos for Syracuse, simply too much to handle. Boise State and Michigan State kicked off a rematch of the national championship from last year in the PEC, and it was an epic series. After the Spartans jumped ahead 2-0 early on, Boise State rallied back a pair of 2-1 wins, forced a winner-take-all Game 5, and with the Spartans on the verge of being reverse swept, they held on. They claimed Game 5 with a 4-2 win. A pair of goals from Knock, who had 6 goals in the series overall, pushes the Spartans to the top. For Boise State, the Broncos ripped 49 shots. Michigan State with an incredible 35 saves. This was one of my favorite series to watch so far. And now, quickly, we're going to bring on Carson Cass to the program. Carson, we talked about this last week. Michigan State may be looking dead in the water. What's your take on this series now that they've kind of won and got themselves right back in it?
3-2 win for Michigan State. After a 3-0 loss last week to the Orange, Michigan State puts it up back together. We see the same championship pedigree that we saw last season from the Spartans. And what was a championship rematch, they did a phenomenal job. They take down the Broncos after what was an annihilation last week against Syracuse, where they only scored 4 goals. This is a complete turnaround for a roster who has made it to a championship in the PEC before and may do it again. We'll have to see down the road.
I think this is going to be a lot of fun, Carson. We appreciate you. We'll hear from you a little bit later on. Baylor, speaking of championships, the championship feels like it runs through Waco right now as the Bears' hot streak continues. That offense has not missed a beat in the spring. 20 goals in the 3-0 sweep over Utah, and the defense was dominant as ever, only allowing 3 goals all series. At 10-0, these Bears will look very tough to stop, and for Utah, you run into the hottest opponent in the PEC, sometimes that's going to happen. I think the Utes can rebound going into next week. And we wrap up Rocket League with a sleeper potential Game of the Year candidate, Kansas, looking to maybe make a massive move in the standings. They had a bye last week, and they just fell kind of flat as the Jayhawks dropped to the Cornhuskers 3-2. They split the first 2 games. Kansas puts Nebraska on the brink with a 2-1 win in Game 3, but after winning Game 4 3-2, Nebraska gets Game 5 into overtime, and shortly after the kickoff, Mincy puts the goal in the back of the net, and Nebraska pulls off an amazing comeback. They pick up their 3rd win of the year, and all of a sudden, that bottom half of the standings is now wide open as we take a look at how Week 1 in Rocket League went down. A pair of 5-game series. Very rare that happens. And, of course, a pair of sweeps as well. Syracuse looking very strong, and Baylor also looking incredibly strong. As we take a look at the standings, of course, at the top, the big teams, Boise State and Baylor. The Bears undefeated. They're going to take on Boise State this week. This one should be a lot of fun. You've got Michigan State and Syracuse right there. The tiebreakers between these teams are really tight. I think it's like 1.5% is how Syracuse currently has that 3 seed. And then you look towards the bottom of the standings, Kansas with that slip up. Now Nebraska maybe has a chance to make some moves. This is going to be a lot of fun kind of maneuvering not only for those top 4 spots, but that 5th place, that 6th place seed. Going to keep your eyes on that. Moving on to Overwatch, we had our first battle of the century in PEC spring. The number 1 Ohio State Buckeyes, the number 2 Syracuse Orange, battling for that top spot and maybe kind of full control of the PEC Overwatch. And it turned into another dominant win for Ohio State. 93 kills from It's King Donut. The Buckeyes struck early, did not let up. Nearly lost the series with the Orange, forcing Kings Road to just barely missing overtime. It was a 3-2 win for Ohio State there. And even then, no Buckeye had more than 6 deaths on King Row. So the Ohio State looks absolutely dominant. 8-1 now. They've got a cushion for the top spot for Syracuse. They maintain second place. They're right back in the clutches of Boise State and Utah. And joining us once again is Carson Cass. Carson, you had a front row seat to this game. We talked about it a few weeks ago on our spring preview that this was maybe the biggest game of the Overwatch season. What is your takeaway about this Ohio State squad after a 3-0 win?
We just finished casting the game. Syracuse obliterated by the Ohio State Buckeyes 3-0. In a way that I have not seen in a while, this is a generational team. This Ohio State squad, whether they can maintain this or not, that is the smartest play I have ever seen out of any collegiate team ever. They have a higher understanding of the game than maybe anyone in the PEC, maybe anyone in collegiate, including a lot of teams made up of these players who are at that kind of pro level. That is absurd. You have to watch this Ohio State team. It is much, much greater than the PEC. This is a must-watch team.
With you, Carson, that game against Boise State towards the end of the year is going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, right now, that 6-0 cumulative score against Syracuse, big win for Ohio State. Utah, they took on Baylor. They did not drop a beat. They took down Boise State last week. They pick up a 3-0 win against Baylor. They're now tied with Boise State at 6-3, as we'll see in the standings here in a little bit. And a statement spring continued for the Utes. PDKK, Reswag, both posting over 60 kills and under 7 deaths. For the Bears, a couple of bright spots. Costa posting a solid 20/18 scoreline in the series. Got a chance to look forward to next week. A couple of bright things there, but this Utah team has kind of come alive recently. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch. And wrapping up the week, Kansas and Nebraska. For Overwatch, Kansas didn't miss a beat this time with a chance to kind of catch up in the standings after a week, or after a bye in week 1. The Jayhawks took down Nebraska 3-0. That means they're only a half game behind Boise State and Utah for potentially that third spot. For Nebraska, the Cornhuskers just trying to find that consistency. A couple bright spots in the game, just hoping to put together that complete series, and I think they can do it sometime in the spring. Overall, we take a look at how week 2 in the PEC Overwatch went down. Of course, the big one, Syracuse, Ohio State, that dominant sweep over Syracuse, and a couple other sweeps to go with it as well for Utah and Kansas. We take a look at the standings. It's Ohio State at the top. They look very, very strong. Of course, that one loss to Boise State means everything could change a couple weeks down the line when these two teams meet up. Syracuse in second place, Boise State just one game ahead of Utah in terms of win-loss percentage. For that next spot, you've got Kansas there as well. That sort of 2 through 5 battle, depending on how Syracuse plays these other top teams, could turn out to be a lot of fun. We move on to Valorant, and while it wasn't an upset, this maybe was sort of the headline of the week in Valorant. Is Ohio State drops their second map ever. Before this, they had never dropped a map to anyone not named Boise State. They were beating down everybody, but Syracuse takes map 2, 18-16, maybe individual map of the year in the PEC. A 31 kill performance by Stomps and Pretz kind of willed Syracuse into that game 3, and for Ohio State, Game 3 was not the usual dominance either. The Orange got the series to 13-10 before falling as Dez picked up 23 kills. So while the Buckeyes improved to 10-0, Syracuse at 3-7 might be proven this is not going to be an easy out team as we go on through the rest of the season. Moving on to a big matchup between Boise State and Michigan State. Of course, the Spartans, the defending champs. The Broncos have looked great all season long, and Boise State jumped over them early and often. 13-4 in Game 1. All 5 Broncos posting positive KDs. In Game 2, much of the same. Boise State jumped on them early. The Spartans got a few more rounds, but Boise State looking to go a perfect 4-0 in maps against the Spartans, and the PEC had a nice little clutch to wrap up the series.
Do it, dash, prep, on his head, Kirisuno taken down, dunked on by Skies, another chance, Aaron gets the first onto him, Cause now potentially looking for it, shorties for everybody. What a good smoke from Slouch makes this difficult because just brains it and walks out. Aaron gets the first skill assist, seen, and both taken, skill assist, what a play to end the game. The Broncos commanding win against Michigan State.
Michigan State's got to worry, by the way, because Utah is quietly lurking right outside that top 3. The Utes improving to 5-4 with a sweep over Baylor. Cost FPS leading everybody at the 38-17 scoreline. Every single Ute posted a positive KD. 3 of them sitting above 2.0 for the series. That's how dominant this Utah team is. I don't think you should be sleeping on Utah as potentially jumping up into that 3 spot in the standings. For Baylor, the Bears, individually, this team looks really, really strong. They put in a couple of great rounds. I think this is going to be somebody that as spring goes on, as we talk about these tiebreakers and you need to pick up sweeps, Baylor might maybe spoil some team seasons. And then wrapping up the week, it was Kansas coming in fresh off the bye. They're taking on Nebraska in a 2-0 sweep. The Jayhawks were on top of it, dropping only 3 rounds the entire series. They trail Utah by just a game. This Kansas team does it 4-5. Maybe a chance to run down the Spartans, maybe even the Utes, depending on how the rest of the season goes. And for Nebraska, a tough spring just kind of continues. They played a lot of tough teams. I think this team is going to be somebody kind of like Baylor, where they might take a round off somebody and completely alter the playoffs when we get closer to Vegas. So there's somebody to keep an eye on. Overall, 4-week 2 in Valorant. This is kind of how it went down. Again, maybe the most surprising result, Ohio State dropping a map to Syracuse, kind of unexpected. Boise State now 4-0ing Michigan State for the entire PEC season. Absolutely massive there. We take a look at the standings. You almost sort of get the feeling we're kind of getting into this 2-horse race. It's Ohio State, it's Boise State. Their first showdown was electric. I think their second showdown is going to be just as great. And now all of a sudden, the defending champs, they've got Utah on their tail. They've got Kansas right there. Michigan State could potentially be looking at a 5 seed. This is going to be something that I don't think a lot of people expected, and I'm curious to see how Michigan State rebounds the rest of the way. Wrapping up the PEC Week 2 with some smash. Syracuse regrouped after a tough loss to Michigan State last week. They did just that with a nice 2-0 win over Ohio State. Though the series got a little tight there after a strong 16-4 win in Match 1. Ohio State had a chance to send Game 2 to a tiebreaker. Down just 9-6 in the final match between C-Dude and J-Rue. Luckily for the Orange, J-Rue picks up 2 stocks, and it's just enough for the Orange to hold on. They sweep the series, but they only win Match 2 11-10. Again, smash top to bottom. Really feels like one of the closest titles we have. Speaking of the top of Smash, though, Michigan State continues to be the cream of the crop, not just in Smash, but potentially every single game, every single title in the PEC. The Spartans have yet to drop a single map. A 16-5, 16-2 win over Boise State as they continue to look amazing. For the Broncos, they're just looking for that spark. They had an up and down fall season. And again, I think this team can show some flashes in the spring, but when you play Michigan State on their A game, it's hard to say who could even beat them. And then wrapping up the week, it is Nebraska and Kansas, and this might be a contender for Smash Series of the Year. A 3-game series, and again, with this team, with this match battle format, it's not always the case where that last match has a lot of impact. Every single match 4 in this series decided the winner. Game 1, Nebraska, they win 11-10. Mixwell picks up just 1 stock, but it was enough to kind of limp the Cornhuskers across the finish line. Game 2, Spink 9-6, 9-6, 4-2, Super 6-7, 3-3 to win the game 12-10 for Kansas. And then in Game 3, Mixwell clutched it up 4-2 in that final series against Spink 9-6 to win the match 13-10, take the 2-1 series lead. Nobody expected that series to be close. Shout out to Kansas and Nebraska. We take a look again at how everything went down. You kind of have to start to wonder how good this Nebraska team is. They're second place in the standings, but a 2-1 win over Kansas. Michigan State with an absolutely dominant performance as well. And Syracuse, again, these matches are just a lot closer than you'd expect. We look at the standings, right? It's Michigan State at the top. We knew that. Then it's Nebraska, right? Of course, they have a couple of games on Minnesota, but that's because they played in week 0. Minnesota had a bye last week. Those 2 games are going to be made up. And now all of a sudden when you're dropping sets, this could be kind of interesting. Syracuse is right there as well. And now all of a sudden, Kansas again. Are they going to beat some of these top teams? No, but they take a set off of Syracuse. They take a set maybe off of Minnesota. That could completely change the dynamic of the season going forward. So I think Smash, if you're going to pick a title to watch, is the one to watch. It feels like every single week anybody can beat anybody unless maybe you're named Michigan State. This should be a lot of fun. But we're going to take a quick break on PEC Match Point. Don't go anywhere, though, because we're going to be joined by a very important member, Adam Stanley, the Director of Esports and Head Coach at Baylor, is going to join us, talk about Baylor. They're dominating in Rocket League, and for a year 0 program, they've got championship aspirations. We'll hear from him coming up next on PEC Match Point.
My friends know me as Derek, but I'm also Master Sergeant Raxter. This is my life in the Air National Guard.
Welcome back, everybody, to PEC Match Point. It's time to go inside the PEC, but before we do that, if you want to stay up to date on everything for the Power Esports Conference, advanced stats, power rankings, the schedule for the rest of the spring semester, make sure you head on over to pec.leagueos.gg. It's got everything you need to know to stay up to date on the premier esports conference in the FBS. Joining me today to go inside the PEC is Adam Stanley, the director of esports and head coach at Baylor. Adam, so happy to have you on the show, man.
I appreciate it, Fish. Yeah, this is exciting for me to be a part of this production. Really appreciative of the opportunity.
And speaking of the opportunity, right? Baylor got the opportunity to join the PEC this year. You come in the second year of the league. So a two-part question to start you off. First, kind of what was the driving force behind joining the Power Esports Conference? And second, we're halfway through your first season. How would you rate it so far?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in collegiate esports for a while now, and in many ways, the PEC sets the standard for what collegiate esports can be. And so when I arrived at Baylor about 8 or 9 months ago, I knew the PEC would be a great fit for us. And so I'm so glad that our institution could be a part of this because it's groundbreaking and transformative in a lot of different ways. And so yeah, we're very excited and honored to be a part of it. We are in our year 0 as a program. So much of the infrastructure and framework for the program is still being developed. But I was able to convince our administration to introduce teams in our very first year. And so this has been a learning curve for a lot of us. Baylor is excited about this, but ultimately, this is a very exciting time for us, not just as a program, but as an institution. The teams, they have enjoyed every bit of the PEC. It is wonderful for us. The pattern, the cadence of games, the rivalries, playing name brand institutions that folks can recognize has been really enjoyable for our students.
And I want to ask you on this because I've asked some other coaches, and I'm a little familiar with Baylor. I made a tour to your premier rival, TCU. They're not in this, of course. What is that rival in the PEC? Is it Kansas from the Big 12 days? Is it Nebraska? Who is your guys' primary rival in the PEC? Or is it more the top teams like the Boise States of the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think institutionally, we're going to look towards maybe the other Big 12 institutions just because we play them in football and basketball and volleyball. And so there's a sort of a natural lean towards those matchups. But the competitive side of us is looking at, developing rivalries with, the top end of the PEC. And so for our Rocket League program, which happens to be pretty good, we're looking at Boise State, we're looking at Syracuse, we're looking at, Michigan States. They're not Big 12, but we kind of highlight those on our calendar.
And you mentioned the Rocket League team. As you said, they're one of the powerhouses in the PEC. And it's kind of interesting, right? In normal college athletics, when you join a conference, you're maybe not expected to be there, right? It's give us 2 or 3 years, then you'll dominate. That hasn't been the case for Baylor Rocket League. So how did you juggle that of, hey, we're coming in the PEC, but you guys almost entered as, I would say, like co-favorites with a couple other schools to win the title this year?
Yeah, well, when I did arrive at Baylor, in that process of getting the program off the ground, and my argument was, hey, let's do one team well, and let's offer some scholarship that can go along with it. And that scholarship, we got really lucky with a few really talented players, and they came. And it just so happens that they're good enough that we made our mark right off the bat. And so, I would say that I'm grateful for the opportunity that Baylor has given us with that scholarship. Very lucky to be in that position. But in a way, we strategically kind of said, let's make one program our premier program in year 0 so that we can show Baylor and its fan base and its alumni base what esports can be. And, being successful in year 0 is a blessing. It's really exciting, and everybody's energized by it.
You guys have looked good so far. You got a big matchup against Boise State that I can't wait to watch. But as everybody knows, the regular season success only takes you so far. You've got to win that championship to make your mark. And in the PEC, it's kind of unique, right? You go to Vegas. It's on land. Especially with the program that's in year 0, how do you go about preparing your teams, right? It's an age-old adage in esports, right? The best teams don't always win on land. Either they're overwhelmed or somebody else just kind of flips that switch. So how are you preparing not just Rocket League, but all of your teams to say, look, the regular season is important, but you really have to play well on land to make sure that you kind of end the season on a high note?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've been a traditional coach long enough to know that preparation is what balances out the nerves that we feel when it comes to the competition itself. So we're just going to do everything we can to be prepared. And so we kind of have a tale of two stories in our program, specifically the Rocket League guys who are really experienced in lands and competitions. This is a little bit different approach for them, and because they're so seasoned. For the other three teams that we carry, those guys who are just excited to compete in person, many of which for the first time. And so being the coach, navigating those individual teams and individual needs as players, that's just a part of what we do. We're in the people business as coaches, and every student is different. And so every team takes on a different kind of approach, and it's my job to make sure that everybody's prepared in the best way possible.
And taking a step back for the PEC, I mean, you mentioned it's year zero, so I'm really excited to hear this, right? Because I'm used to programs like Boise State or Utah that have been around forever. Just take us through, as best you can, a virtual tour of what it looks like to be at Baylor Esports. What's the day-to-day, the week-to-week look like, especially for you who's building the program from scratch, essentially?
Yeah, that's every day's different. Fish, I'm telling you, every day's different, which again, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, but we are building the airplane as we fly it. And so we are not fully stood up. We are not fully functional, but this endeavor is so good that we couldn't take an opportunity to skip a year for these students. And so it's for them. And so the anxiety and stress and all of that is worth it ultimately, because they're having a good experience with it. And so ultimately, we want a program, and we'll have a program eventually that, every hour of their week is scheduled, just like traditional athletics. We're practicing, we're scrimmaging, we're workouts, we're scheduling study tables, we're doing all of those sorts of things. We have many of those things in place now, but we're doing our best with what we have currently. So we're not in full development yet, but we will get there soon.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see what you guys do. And the final question, I'm always curious. I love to ask the different directors we've had on, what's sort of the outside perspective, right? You and I are on the inside. We'd love to say esports is number one, but what's that outside perspective? I walked up to a random Baylor student, asked them about esports. Do you know what that reaction would be? Kind of gauge the outside as best you can of how they view your program?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a question that I haven't been able to solve over the last 20 years of my involvement in esports, but there's a constant pattern of just education. It's really just showing people what this is. And once they can get their eyes on it, they become believers pretty quick. And so there's plenty of that going on internally at Baylor. The good thing is that, there's 88% of students 12 to 25 are gaming at some level. And so many of those folks have somewhat of an idea of what we're doing. And so, the internal marketing and storytelling is there. We're beginning to catch steam as part of energy as far as the campus goes. Nice. But Baylor has been involved in esports for a couple years now, from an admissions and marketing standpoint. And so this is the first year for varsity, but the storytelling of esports goes back a couple years. And so, I would say this. I would say there's energy, there's excitement, nice. There's enthusiasm, not just from our students, but from our alumni and our administration. We've got a lot of buy-in here, and the administration is very excited about the potential for what esports can do for our institution. So again, I'm an alumni of Baylor, and coming back to Baylor to build this program, it's a dream come true. And so, that story though is not finished yet. We're still building it, and we're still working towards the longevity of this program, the sustainability of this program, and the proof that this is touching students and informing them on feelings of belonging and purpose and identity, and all of those really valuable things that are maybe more important than the video game themselves.
Hey, I can't argue with that on that, and doesn't help if you guys can bring home a championship in maybe Rocket League. So best of luck to you out in the rest of the season. I hope to see you guys down in Vegas. I mean, you've got a big matchup this week against Boise State. You guys have been a lot of fun. I can't wait to see what you guys do the rest of the year and maybe going forward in the PEC.
Fish, thank you for the opportunity. Glad to talk esports. Thanks so much.
Adam Stanley, Director of Esports, Head Coach at Baylor. Year 0 of the program. This is absolutely insane. As I mentioned, they've got a massive matchup against Boise State. We're going to look at that matchup coming up on PEC Match Point. Welcome back into PEC Match Point. Once again, a big shout out to Adam for joining the program. I've loved what Baylor's been doing this year. Cannot wait to see this matchup that we're about to talk about and maybe see them down in Vegas. Again, that program's been a lot of fun. But we've got a ton of matchups coming up in week 3 of the PEC, and we lead off with Rocket League that has a massive matchup. We talked about it in Overwatch last week, that 1-2 matchup. That's what we get this week in PEC Rocket League week 3. We kick off with the first place Baylor Bears and the second place Boise State Broncos. The Broncos nearly had an epic comeback that fell just short against Michigan State. The Bears have looked somehow, I don't even know if this was possible, better in the spring than they did in the fall. Last time these teams met, it was a 3-0 in favor of Baylor, but every single game was decided by 1 goal. I do not expect this to be a 3-0. The defending champion Broncos, I think they have exactly what you need to take down Baylor, give them a first loss. I think if you're going to pick one matchup that you want to watch this week, it's got to be this one. We also got Michigan State. After that win, they're now only a game and a half of Boise State for that second place spot. You maybe start to do some math. Boise State maybe loses to Baylor. Michigan State wins. This is going to be kind of close. Those top 3 spots remain very, very tight. Syracuse up there as well, the top 4 even. They're going to take on Ohio State, a Big Ten rival. The Buckeyes at 3-7. Draw their second straight top 4 team. They fell to Syracuse, as we saw last week. Michigan State, they're trying to find themselves, right? They're lagging a little bit behind Syracuse in the tiebreaker categories. They kind of need a 3-0 here to keep pace if you're Michigan State. We're almost already getting into this. You got to 3-0 teams, not just beat teams. Nebraska and Minnesota, they're going to face off in just a pair of teams that I think have had some unfortunate fall seasons and have shown some bright spots in the spring, especially the Nebraska Cornhuskers. I mean, they're riding high after a 3-2 win over Kansas. It could be, if they put together a second straight win, all of a sudden, watch out for this team. Minnesota, looking back to the last week of the fall, their best Rocket League has been their last 2 games they played. They were off last week on a bye. This series, I think, could be a lot of fun. Maybe one of those where the stakes might not be as high as Boise State Baylor, but I think you're going to see some quality Rocket League. Kansas and Utah, they wrap up week 3 of the PEC Rocket League. The Jayhawks just starting the spring off on the wrong foot. An upset loss to Nebraska. They're now maybe in danger of falling out of that 5th place spot if they take another mistake. For the Utah Utes, there's this logjam of teams at the bottom of the standings. And all of a sudden, now the 5th place spot is up for grabs. You pick up a win over Kansas. You're looking better and better. Massive implications in this game, again, for that middle part of the standings that can matter going into Vegas. Moving on into Overwatch, Boise State going to kick things off. They head into week 3 of PEC Overwatch, coming off a bye, trying to rebound after a week 1 loss to Utah. And they're just marginally ahead of Utah for that 4th place spot. So winning over Baylor, again, in that dominant fashion has massive implications. For the Bears, a second comeback. You take down Boise State. You even take maybe a map or 2 off Boise State, right? That bodes well for kind of building that momentum that I think teams need for the spring. Because remember, the regular season only gets you so far, as we talked about with Adam. It's Vegas, it's the playoffs where you can make those crazy moves. And I think Baylor could be one of those teams. Nebraska and Minnesota, they meet up in a battle of teams who know, again, the spring is a great chance to show that fall was just about working things out, perfecting the process. Both these teams have shown their ability to maybe kind of take those top 4 teams, those Boise States, those Syracuses, the Utahs, the Ohio States of the world, on map. I mean, Minnesota nearly took a map off of Ohio State in week 1. They got Kings Road to 3-2 and nearly forced overtime. A win here, great job for either team to maybe build some confidence. And again, I think these are some teams that as we get into those tiebreakers, they're going to play spoilers a lot more often than maybe people expect. And for Utah and Kansas, I almost want to say this is maybe the biggest match of Overwatch in the spring because it's a revenge match for the fall. Utah had taken a really slow start to the season. People are kind of wondering, is this that same Utah team we're used to in Overwatch being a juggernaut? They have a 3-2 epic comeback win over the Jayhawks, and all of a sudden, boom, they've been hot ever since. I think they've only dropped 1 game, and that was to Boise State in the fall since that series. So this could be absolutely massive for Kansas. A win over Utah not only kind of eases that fall loss, but it shoots the Jayhawks right into a chance at that 3rd seed, right? Boise State, Utah, and Kansas are kind of neck and neck 3 through 5. This is a massive game for both sides. For Valorant, Boise State, they kick things off. They're just trying to keep pace with Ohio State, who maybe faltered a little bit as we saw earlier in the show. They'll take on the Baylor Bears. Boise State has looked really, really great in the spring season. They dominated defending champs Michigan State, almost kind of eliminating Michigan State for maybe a shot at that #1 seed. For Baylor, they have really strong individuals. They have some players who rank in the top in PEC and plenty of stats. It's about putting together that team effort and maybe taking a map off of Boise State. As we saw with Syracuse, you win one map against a tough team, you never know what could happen. Speaking of Ohio State, they're maybe a little bit more mortal than we expected. They're still 10-0. They get a chance at the defending champs Michigan State. And now the Spartans, by the way, they're in danger of picking up their 4th loss. And not only that, if you think back to the fall, Ohio State beat them 2-0. Boise State beat them 2-0. Boise State just beat them 2-0. This is at risk of Michigan State going 0-8 against the top 2 teams in PEC Valorant. If they want to stay title contenders, they need to show up in this game and at least, if they don't win, get it to a game 3. Nebraska and Minnesota, they're going to square off. Both these sides looking for their first win of the spring. Minnesota had a bye. They had a couple strong rounds against Ohio State in week 1. The Cornhuskers, they're hoping to rebound. It was a Kansas series. They're just hoping to forget this one. Again, all it takes is that one win, and all of a sudden you're right back in it in PEC. The standings are that close, and both these teams looking to pick up a win. Utah and Kansas, this one has a lot of stakes, very similar to the Overwatch tilt between these two teams. If Michigan State continues to falter, that 4th seed suddenly up for grabs. Utah just slightly ahead at 5-4. The Jayhawks at 4-5. A win, all of a sudden we're tied. Now we're both a game back at Michigan State. If you're looking to snag a top 3 spot, you've got to win this game. The Utes, surprisingly enough, by the way, hold the advantage over Michigan State if we get to tiebreakers. So a win here for Utah almost puts the 3 seed in their pockets, which is crazy to think about that the defending champs could be all the way down at number 4. And we wrap things up with Smash. Again, as I said earlier in the show, I think this top to bottom is the strongest and most competitive title we have in the PEC. Boise State and Baylor are going to meet up to kind of kick things off. Both teams looking for success in the spring. Either team, you string together a few wins in Smash, you're in 5th place if you're Baylor or if you're Boise State. It could do a great job to set that tone heading into the middle of the spring grind. Remember, we're already a quarter way through the spring season. It's kind of crazy how fast PEC has gone. Ohio State, they're going to try their best against a buzzsaw of a Michigan State team. I know Ohio State, it's not the team up north, but it's the team up north's little brother. So if you can upset anybody, I'm sure they'd love to do it to a team with Michigan in the name. Right now, though, the Spartans haven't showed a single sign of slowing down. Dominant wins over Syracuse and Boise State so far. Though, again, we talked to Ohio State's director in the fall. He said this is a young roster. Maybe you get some valuable experience. You learn what it takes to beat a title contender, and this goes a long way for the rest of the season. Nebraska and Minnesota, they're going to wrap up the week with a battle for 2nd place. And to be honest, both teams have been a little shaky at times so far in the spring, right? Minnesota was off last week, but had to go to a tiebreaker against Ohio State in week 1. We talked about earlier in the show, the Cornhuskers needing all 3 games and every single match 4 counting against Kansas to tick up that win. So even though there's a little bit of gap in the standings, right? Nebraska has 8 wins, Minnesota just at 6, but Nebraska has 2 extra games played over the Gophers, so that could change very quickly. I think this matchup, depending on who wins, could really set the tone for where Smash is going to set in that 2 through 4, right? You've got Minnesota, you've got Nebraska, and you've got Syracuse there as well. But week 3, as we said, it's going to have massive matchups across the board. Let's take a look at exactly what is going to go down here between these two teams. Kicking things off, it is Utah and Kansas. Overwatch and Valorant kind of have very similar stakes between these two teams. We're also going to have some very exciting matchups here. We've got Nebraska and Minnesota, Big Ten rivalry there. We've got Ohio State and Michigan State, another Big Ten rivalry with some massive Valorant implications. And, of course, we've got Boise State and Baylor, the Rocket League tilt of the century. You have to watch that one if you're a fan of PEC Rocket League. Really, if you're the fan of the PEC, you want to make sure you tune into Boise State and Baylor Rocket League because that could be a championship preview. You don't always get those this early in the season. But Week 3 is shaping up to be a ton of fun here in the PEC. Make sure you join us next week to cut up on all the action from around the league here on PEC Match Point. Don't forget, if you're craving more PEC content, pec.leagueos.gg has you covered. Big shout out to the Idaho Air National Guard. They make PEC Match Point possible every single week. Good luck to all the teams. Can't wait to see that Rocket League matchup, and we'll see you guys all next week.